Welcome everybody to the second of this series. As Roger says, I will try and do more detail of the National Bee Improvement Programme this week. Last week I outlined how it came about, really, how the idea developed. And this week we want to try and get across how it's actually going to work. So what we'll try and cover tonight is the importance of bee improvement, which is just a recap really, seeking maximum participation, increasing influence by working in groups, the use of breeder queens provides the key to the whole thing, use of improvement zones to develop a strain, and record keeping to select breeders. And so hopefully at the end of this evening, well, last week there were lots of questions, which was really good because I feel like I'm talking to myself, but it was nice to have all that feedback. And I didn't see too many rude ones, unless they'd been edited out before I saw them. Anyway, let's just quickly recap what we did last week. That map is the area which we more or less aim to cover. It's Britain and Ireland and associated islands. Now, I'm just repeating this bit. There's the importance of beekeeping, we all know, is crucial to agriculture and food production. It's crucial to the environment for biodiversity. And as far as our bees are concerned, it's important to have hardy and healthy bees with good overwintering. Most beekeepers want nice docile bees that they can enjoy working with, and it's much more efficient and easier working with docile bees. Pollen productivity is important for many beekeepers. They put a lot of time and effort in. They want a bit of return, possibly in the form of honey or in the form of pollination of plants. To aid those things, we like low swarming, good brood pattern, and everyone benefits from a hardy and productive honeybee. So that's our goal, if you like. Now, one of the reasons for setting up the scheme was because imports have been rising year on year for many years, and they're reaching quite dizzy heights. We don't think they add much to us, and they certainly have some disadvantages. The principal one that we know DEFRA and others are concerned about is biosecurity risks. And there's evidence, or in all likelihood, that has been a problem in the past and likely to be a problem in the future. With imported bees, you get no local adaptation. I'll explain that a bit further because one or two people questioned that, I think. Not imported bees aren't selected for our needs, what we need in our conditions. If we select our own bees, we can pick and choose the qualities that we want. The quality of offspring deteriorates over time, over succeeding generations. When we import, we're mixing up the subspecies of honeybee. Some people like that because they get the benefit of hybrid vigor, but the result after a generation or two is a complete breakdown of the subspecies, and hope of selecting and improving from hybrid stock is very, very difficult. So we have laid down many rules for this project because we want as many people as possible to join in, so people can make their own rules to some extent. But we have laid down one rule, if you like, and that's that participants will avoid the use of imported stock or offspring of recently imported stock. They'll treat the bees we've got already as a resource, and that's the resource we've got to work with, and that's what we're trying to improve the quality of. So one of the aims is to reduce hybridization of the subspecies, which makes improvement difficult. Somebody asked about what's an import and what isn't, and it can get very confusing, but at the moment, as things stand, we've agreed that movement within the UK and Ireland is permitted within the scheme if it helps to maintain or improve the strain. So you have to work that one out for yourselves. To get back to the local adaptation, there's a lot of dispute about this. Some people think it's meaningless and others think it's very important. And that is a natural process that happens through natural selection. The most suited to an environment will be the ones that survive, and over time you develop that local adaptation. Colony losses contribute to local adaptation by weeding out the least suitable colonies or genes. So the beekeeper doesn't have to do much at all. He just works with whatever's left, whatever the survivors are. Tempting to look out the area for more stock when you lose a lot, but it's much better if you can just continue with what you've got, because they're the ones, the surviving colonies are the best basis for a locally adapted population. And that's the basis of this scheme, I think. Work with nature and select from survivors. It's a quite simple principle, really. And we're going to go into a lot more detail about how we refine that population tonight. We're looking for maximum participation in this project, because the more people that join in, the more progress we'll make, basically. If you're on your own, it's very hard. And if there's lots of others doing it with you, it becomes that much easier. So to get maximum participation and reduce the number of imports and improve the quality of our bees, we've set the bar quite low, really. Beekeepers are free to use methods and systems that they prefer or they develop. They're up to them. We're not going to dictate, you must do this, you must do that. But we are going to make suggestions, and those suggestions will be available for people to download and so on, and consider and see if they want to do those things. For example, there'd be a record card that you can use. You can, by all means, use your own record card if you want, if you've already got one established and it suits you, no problem with that at all. And this guidebook that we're compiling will have all these sort of things that will help people, like the record card, like methods of queen rearing, like instructions how to make nukes up and so on, for anyone who doesn't have that information to hand. And we can update, modify and add as necessary. And all the participants will be able to contribute. If they think they've got a really good way of doing something, and they can put that forward and others can gain from that. So it's really going to be a sharing of knowledge between all the participants, and that will help everybody. It's not sort of a few people at the top dictating how it all goes. It's everybody being a participant and counting for something. So you can contribute your ideas, your methods, your techniques. And sections from this guidebook can be downloaded by individuals or groups as and when they need them. That's more as a recap of what we said last week, really. One thing we mentioned last week was that although we welcome all beekeepers, and some people are having to operate on their own, and they can still do things, make contributions, still make progress. But if they can pool their resources with others, which we expect to happen quite a bit in perhaps associations, maybe association apiaries, or maybe just groups within associations, depending on who wants to go along with the whole idea. By working in a group, you can increase your influence, which carries a lot more weight. You can pool resources, which helps. Some people have got spare equipment and so on, which they might be willing to lend to the project. You can share your efforts, so no one has to get burnt out from doing too much, contributing too much, which is a common problem, actually. someone ends up doing an enormous amount of effort and then they just think, oh, I'll blow this for luck, it's too much. But you've got to all work out how to share your efforts. And you can produce queens and bees for local beekeepers, which will all contribute to the project. The first thing is to get together and agree your aims and strategy. Because if you've all got different ideas, and you will have different ideas, but you've got to agree some common aims and common ways of doing it in order to make progress. Who's going to do the work? That's really important. You're going to share it out. And some beekeepers are more knowledgeable than others and so on. But the best way to learn is to take an active part and have a go. Like queen rearing, for example. You might think, God, I haven't done any queen rearing before. This is going to be impossible, But as soon as you have a go, one season, the next season, you've done it all before, you can improve on it and soon get into the swing of things. The group's going to have to think about costs, financial viability, funding, etc. And the more you go in for that, the more complicated it gets. You might be able to get by without any monetary exchanges at all, and probably that will simplify the issue, but more than likely costs will be involved, funding may be involved, and so on. The group's got to weigh up all these things and work out how to keep everybody happy, basically. All the participants should keep records of their bees, their performance, and this will help in the selection of breeders, which I'll talk more about later on. And because of our tricky position, and we've got such a hybridized population of bees, it pays to work in small areas initially for the actual mating of the queens you've reared, and you can get those more secure matings within those small areas, but we'll talk about that as well. If you're a bee farmer, you've got a lot more resources to work with. You're used to working on a big scale. You have the resources to set up queen rearing and bee improvement. You may do some already, you may not, but it's a good opportunity. You could develop an extra sideline to your business, selling queens, nukes, or just focus on improving your own stock. For example, someone might have a large bee farm, and I got this idea by talking to someone very recently who's in this kind of position. I hope he won't mind me quoting it. Very large bee farm, mostly yellow bees, some dark bees, some probably near natives. The temper of the bees can be an issue. They're not all docile bees by any means. Productivity obviously is important on a bee farm. That's how the whole thing runs. They do not buy in queens. What's the best way forward for them? Well, I could make a few suggestions which they might or might not like, but I would tend to, best way forward I would suggest is try and put all the near native bees in one area and keep records, run selection and improvement program with them. And by being in one area, you're likely to get more mating within the strain, and you could develop that. You might think, well, hang on, my yellow bees are more productive. What about doing something with them? Well, you can do the same thing with your yellow bees if you want in another area, and put your best yellow ones there and see how you get on with that. And then it's not for me to dictate what the outcome will be, but you'll be experimenting amongst your own bees and seeing if you could develop a strain that breeds true and so on. And that's, everyone's got to work out their own path, really. Now, working within a strain, and it's best not to start from here. That's what we can more or less say in this country. Some areas are much better than others. And I think, there's probably areas of Scotland which are generally good, and certainly I would probably suggest most of Ireland is good, in that they've got a strain already, a pretty pure strain to run with. If you're in England or Wales, it might not be, for most parts, it might not be so easy. And it certainly wasn't particularly good round here when I started. there were a few, like in most areas, there were a few that resembled native bees, and they're the ones I started working with. But anyway, we've got to work with what we've got. So, and it's no good pretending anything else than what the situation is. So you've got to choose to work with what's best in your area, and you've got to make that decision. I've got my views, but it's your views that count. You're the one who's doing it in your area, and you know far more about the bees in your area than I know about them. You're probably aware Bibber likes to work with the native strain, and why do they like that? And I mean, if we go back to 1850, say, this is probably what Europe looked like for races of honeybee, and they're all more or less in their own regions. And there may have been the odd import before then, but there wasn't much import. The first recorded import was 1859 to Devon, and but ever since then we've been importing more and more, especially through the 20th century and 21st century. So we've been mixing up the subspecies quite dramatically, and now there's a general mixture all around. In fact, a survey was done DNA analysis with Catherine Thompson and so on. Took some samples from the MBU, which they collected from around England and Wales, and tried to work out what the different parts of those bees were genetically. And they drew up this pie chart to indicate the various carniolans, various Ligurian bees, and perhaps some Balkan type bees. And surprisingly, there was a large proportion of our original native strain, about 45%, which when that first came out, we found quite encouraging because it seemed to make sense to run with that one. But you all have to make your own decisions. That's what I decided to do. I'd already decided that was probably the easiest strain to work with, because it's the easiest strain to maintain. And I explained last week why we want to stick with the strain, because they breed true, which means the offspring most likely resemble appearance. Instead of just coming out as too big a mixture to do anything with, you've got a decent continuity to work with. And I did it in the most basic way, which some people might not like and others will like, and that was to look at their appearance. And if your bees look like, all one type of bee, as in this photograph, they're more or less all the same. The abdomen's the same color, the thorax has got those yellowy brown hairs, and there's not much variation in them. And certainly when I started, colonies you'd never really see a colony like that. You'd see some like that, and you'd see some yellow bees and so on amongst them. Anyway, to determine a strain, you can do it in 3 ways, really. You can do DNA analysis on your bees, which is expensive, and the results don't usually come through for ages. So by the time you get the results, you've lost the bees. Morphometry is another way that came in, and it's debatable about how accurate it is, but I think it does give you an indication of what subspecies you've got, and it works on measuring veins in the bee's wing, and different subspecies have different ratios, shall we say, and it can be plotted on the graph, and you can say that that's a mixture, or that's a native bee, that's a carniolan, and that's a Ligurian, if they're in different parts of the graph. My system of just checking on their appearance has stood me in good stead. They seem to breed true, and when I have had some tested by DNA analysis, which I didn't pay for, they came out pretty good. So I think the system does work. And you can assess the appearance of your workers on a scale. We do it on a 1 to 5 scale. A -2 to +2 scale is also very good. In fact, it's perhaps a bit easier to use in actual fact. But 1 to me would be no sign of any native bee in the colony. and 5 would be 100% native, and the other numbers would be gradations in between. And I'm telling you all this because this is how I do it, and this is how I try and maintain a strain. You've got different circumstances. You're going to have to work out what's the best thing to do in your area. You might decide to try a plump for another strain, but I think this is the easiest way to do it, and I think I have my reasons for thinking it's the easiest way to maintain a strain. And the uniform appearance indicates the queen has mated within the strain. So sometimes we breed a nice dark queen, and then we find the offspring is really mixed. And we take that as meaning she's mated with quite a few drones of a different subspecies. So it's a useful indicator. And we're not the only ones who use it as an indicator of what's going on. That's been done, I read about that being done in Egypt when they tried to establish the Carniolans in Egypt many years ago. And they used the appearance as a good guideline as to how you maintain a strain. And you can check your results with the DNA analysis. I mean, if they all look like that, you know you've probably got the native strain. The queen's colour varies. To me, they're quite attractive when they look dark, but they do vary. Sometimes they can be a bit banded and so on. And someone asked about the colour of the legs at a previous talk I did. I mean, that's quite common. I think they get these what I call red legs, but it's sort of gingery colour. That's quite typical, I would say. After the last talk, we didn't get through all the questions. Many came through, and quite a few people asked about instrumental insemination, and it's always a hot topic. People think that really is the best way forward to make sure you get decent matings, because that is a big issue, isn't it? How to get decent matings, how to get a strain developing, and I will tell you how I do it in a minute. But certainly instrumental insemination can be used, and people get good results. They quickly refine qualities of the bee. But the problem is, as I see it, it's never going to be a technique for the mass market for everyone. Some people get good at it, not many, not half as many as the number of kits that are sold, should we say. And some people develop it really well. They can develop quite good refined bee through that system. But what happens when that bee gets introduced into the general population? The qualities are quickly lost. So I think of it more as a technique to assist in bee improvement rather than the be all and end all. Same as if you were bee breeding, you select both like the father's and the mother's side. You could choose your drone colonies carefully. And if you had an isolated mating apiary, it's a similar sort of thing to instrumental insemination. You can get good results, and we know they do get good results in places like Denmark through this isolated mating apiaries. But when you introduce them into the general population, you start to lose it quite quickly and have to repeat the performance all the time, bringing in new stock. So I don't think it's a substitute for what this program is trying to do. We need to build up from the base. And then those techniques, isolated mating stations or instrumental insemination, may have something to give us or may have something to add. But if we get the base right, it makes everything else fall into place. Now, one of the crucial parts of this is keeping records of the qualities of the bees. And the reason for that is so we know what to breed from. I remember many years ago when I tried to form a little group breeding or improvement group with a few friends, and we had a meeting, and then we suddenly realized, hang on a minute, we haven't a clue what we're going to breed from, because we hadn't got as far as keeping records of their performance and so on. It's absolutely essential. So we would like participants to keep records of the attributes of their bees, perhaps how they've overwintered, how docile they are, whether they swarm a lot or whether they don't swarm, their health and the brood pattern, the honey yield, or more particularly, the relative honey yield. mean, if a colony gives 100 pounds of honey, that can mean one thing, but if the average for the apiary is 150 pound, that's not very good. But if the average for the apiary is 50 pound, 100 pounds, excellent. So you've got to compare it with the average for the apiary. This gets your relatively, oh, I've done that wrong, relative honey yield, RHY, I should say. And that's a pretty important figure. It helps you determine which ones to breed from. We like native appearance because that helps me keep the strain going. You might have a different system, and we haven't dictated it. We obviously favour that one, but we're trying to get the whole country involved, so people have got to do what's best in their area. There may be other qualities you want to go for, such as how much you've had to feed your bees. And some bees need a lot more feeding than others, but you might think that's irrelevant, so don't bother with it. You might want to do something with Varroa, because if we want sustainable bees, we want bees that can tolerate Varroa ultimately. This treating of bees is all very well, but it means that we're not building up the sustainability. So any system that develops that Varroa tolerance will be looked on favourably. I'll just mention a bit more about that actually, because it's a tricky one. We've had Varroa for nearly 30 years in this country. I mean, most beekeepers treated for Varroa initially, and the ones that didn't, well, not the ones that, don't know about most treated, but the ones that didn't treat certainly lost their bees pretty quickly. And many people went out of beekeeping at that stage. And it was pretty lethal, particularly lethal to start with, I think, because the bees hadn't ever seen anything like it. And perhaps it's got a bit less lethal over the years. And I mean, there are now many reports of beekeepers not treating their bees and getting away with it. It may affect their survival, it may affect their performance. So even if they survive, their performance could be affected because it's having a big effect on the health of the colony. So these factors have got to be considered. Long term, we need bees to be Varroa tolerant. But how are we going to get there? So anyone who wants to go down that road and is able to develop Varroa tolerance in their bees, we would encourage. For myself, I have tried a couple of times by reducing treatment or not treating at all, with fairly disastrous results. I've lost a lot of my bees and it takes a couple of years to recover. But having said that, I'm very keen to develop this. So we're in the process of withdrawing some apiaries from treatment. So if we lose quite heavy losses in those apiaries, it won't be disastrous. We can stand it and we can breed for the ones that do survive and so on. So we're hoping that's a sort of stepping zone for me, a simple one. There's much more complicated ways of getting bees to tolerate Varroa or developing that process, but I like to do everything simple, so I'll go for the easiest option. Now, you'll need a record card. Some of you probably got your own record cards of various descriptions. Most record cards they tell you about your day-to-day beekeeping, but they don't tell you much about the qualities of the queen or the colony. So we've developed a record card. It changed quite a bit over the years, and it's changing all the time. But it's basically stayed the same. And I'll highlight the important area, for example. Perhaps it could be like this. So what we do, each colony has a record. We keep it in an A4 file folder, and we come along and we look at the bees, and each row is a week. So we put the date in, first column, and we might note down the size of the colony. At the beginning of the season, it'll probably be something like anything from, it might be 8 frames big or something. So we probably put 0.8 to represent 8 frames of a brood box, although we know they're 11. and then perhaps when it gets to brood box, we put 1, and then 1 plus 1 is 1 brood box full and a super full, and so on like that. And it just gives us an idea that the colony is going all right and building up nicely and so on. The important ones is perhaps the next 5. Docility, as I've already said, we mark it out of 5. A good way is +2 and -2. So are the bees nice to handle, or are they a bit nasty to handle? So that'll decide if you're a plus or a minus. Are they good or very good? It'll depend if you're +1 or +2. In our case, we have the equivalent of 4s and 5s for good. 5 is where they're really docile and pleasant and still, excellent in every way, really. And 4 would be if they're a bit more, they're not aggressive at 4, but they are they're more excitable and so on, perhaps a few more taking to the air, a bit more running around the comb and what have you. Next one is swarming. Now, it isn't that they've actually swarmed, it's really about preparations to swarm. So we're looking through our bees every week, every 7 days. And we're looking, one of the things we're looking for is queen cells. So if they're making queen cells, that's the preparation to swarming. So it'd be marked down a bit. And and so on. Health and brood pattern. If the brood is really lovely, solid brood, looks excellent for health, and she's laying very well and quite a nice lot of brood, good, get a good mark for brood pattern. Every time we take honey off, we record it. You can do this how you like, really, but we find it easiest to estimate how much honey we're removing. So as we take the combs off, we estimate the weight in each comb and add it up and put the figure in the honey yield. Depends how you do it. You might take the whole super, you might be able to mark the whole super as coming from a certain hive and weigh it when you get back to the honey room. We record amount fed, but I don't know how significant that is. And we can use these forms for our everyday beekeeping as well. So if the queen excluder is broken, for example, we needs a new queen excluder, or if there are a few cups and maybe the odd queen cup with an egg in it, we'd probably take that out and wouldn't, if that's only as far as they got, probably wouldn't give that a black mark, but we'd probably note to watch for swarming. So we would have a good look next week and see how they get on and so on. And that's how it works. At the end of the season, you could have a summary. I mean, these cards should really be on spreadsheets, but we haven't done that yet. We need a spreadsheet expert to come forward and help us out with this. But all those from those individual record cards, it could go forward to your summary for the apiary. And say you've got 12, well, we have usually 12 colonies, up to 12 colonies on an apiary site. And you can see on this particular one, the first one gave £20, the third one gave 26, fifth one gave 73, and number 11 gave 145. So you can work out your average for the honey yielding colonies, and then you can work out what I was talking about before, your honey ratio, your honey yield ratio, or relative honey yield, as I called it in the previous slide. So this number 11 scored 2.29, so it's more than twice the average for the apiary. And looking along, what other scores it got 5 for native appearance. It got 4.5 or more for temper, so it's pretty near perfect. It didn't swarm during the season, and so on. So it's pretty. We think that's an excellent colony to breed from. So that goes forward, and assuming that survives the winter, that would go forward, and we'd use that as one of our breeder queens. Now you'll usually find, well, between none and 3 decent colonies on an apiary. Well, the best colonies for breeding. So we highlight all the ones that we think are worth breeding from. And then we see which ones will survive the winter well. And we want them to come through nice, overwinter well again. And then we'd we'd be keen to breed from them. Right, now this crucial element is that is the mystery or the puzzle of beekeeping. How do we get decent matings? You know, it's puzzled everyone for years, really, and we always come back to incidental insemination or isolated mating, and I think you can actually get quite good results if you can identify an area which you can use. And I mean, some places are better than others for finding suitable areas. I'm fairly lucky in that I live by the sea. We've got sea around 3 sides. This is an area of southeast Cornwall. It helps a little bit. It doesn't help with your neighbouring beekeepers because they still could use whatever bee they like. But obviously, if you've got less land mass around you, you'll have less problems for your neighbouring beekeepers. The secret is to get an area where you can get the beekeepers on your side. If there's a bee farmer in that area importing tons of bees, it might make it very difficult to develop your strain, and that's what you don't want. So you try and find an area where that isn't happening and where the beekeepers that are there are quite sympathetic to what you're trying to do. It might be a group of you can get together and you're aiming to achieve good matings within the strain that you've developed or developing. Choose the best area. You want little influence of unwanted strains. You want something you can dominate with your strains. And it sounds difficult, but I will show you how I do it. Well, yeah, how I do it, and it's an ongoing thing. It never stops. Check apiaries. We do this every spring. We check our apiaries in the area, and we cull or remove unwanted colonies. In our case, we remove them. We don't see any point in culling. There's nothing wrong with these bees. They're perfectly good. They're no good for breeding. They're perfectly good for honey production. So we move them out of the area, out of the improvement zone or whatever you want to call it, and keep this area for breeding. So we just keep the ones we really like that seem to be in the right strain, seem to have the right temper and so on. And it's going to take time to achieve a perfect state, if such a perfect state really exists. It's never going to be perfect because there's always some beekeeper will bring something in that doesn't quite match with what you're doing. But if you can basically maintain a strain, it allows you to make more rapid progress. That's the point about it. And as far as native bees are concerned, there's a tendency for them to mate within the strain. I don't know if it's applicable for any other variety or any other subspecies. And I haven't got scientific proof for that, but I certainly find it in practice. It seems to work. And there are various reasons for that, but we haven't got time to go into that now. So you select your breeder queens, and this is a sort of chart to show you how the system works. And the next one's the chart. You can rear numerous breeder queens from one queen. This is the spiel to it, really. So we select a breeder queen, we rear numerous queens. Those queens will mate with any drone in the area. It could be any type of bee. And this is how you have to start. Well, the queens, whatever they mate with, they will produce good drones. In other words, drones related to your original breeder queen, because they're from the unfertilized eggs. And this is the crux of the matter, really. This is how you help to build your strain up, whichever way you're trying to do it. So you select your breeder queens by record keeping, and your breeder queen is going to produce all the queens that are going to produce the good drones. So don't panic if they don't mate very nicely. They mate with all sorts of things. And this is the diagram that goes with that. So year one, you start. You've already identified your bees from last season. You've got several breeder queens. The more the better in a way, because we like to keep the genetic diversity up within the strain. We rear lots of offspring, as many as you can manage. Those offspring, as I said, are going to be useful because when you The following season, you'll have another lot of breeder queens, rear another lot of queens. And where will the drones come from to mate with this second year's new queens? Hopefully they'll come from all your queens you reared last year to a large extent. And they're from the same strain, so they're mating with your latest batch of queens. And you repeat the process in year 3, and you keep going. You keep making your area better by removing quantities you don't like, keep improving the strain, and it gets better year on year. So now some years are much better than others. Depends what other beekeepers around you are doing. If they've caught a swarm from somewhere and brought it into the area, it might be a totally different strain to what you're using. And you'll find, oh, matings aren't quite so good this year. But we've always found we've had some good matings. So we've always had something to get a breeder queen from. Right, time is pressing on. So I mentioned the NatBib guidebook last week. We're going to have this as a reference work for people to dig into, download whatever they want, whatever they need to find out. You're free to do things your own methods if you like. You'll have things like queen rearing methods. I mean, I use a certain method, I could put that one on there. Other people use a different method, they could put that on there. And we try and have methods that suit all types of beekeepers, rather than the smallest scale to the biggest scale. There'll be queen rearing from naturally occurring cells, queen rearing without larval transfer, different techniques, cup kit or genta methods, or there'll be grafting methods. And so that's what I happen to use, is the queen right method as described by the MBU. And it works very well for me and I like it, but it doesn't matter. You might like something else and you can use something else. Choose a method that you like the sound of and practice until you get it right. And that's what it's all about. You might think, God, I don't know what I'm doing the first time you tackle it. And that's exactly how I was. Don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll just follow the book as best I can. And it was relatively successful. And then you just keep doing it. And you gradually become better at it. And there'll be information on using nuke boxes, mini nukes, and mini plus nukes, which I like. They work very well for me, those 6-frame mini plus nukes, because I can overwinter colony or nukes in them very easily with new queens. So I've got a nice lot of nukes right at the start of the season with bees in them to start me off with my queen rearing. I haven't got to restock a load of nukes. So just to summarize, we're seeking the maximum number of beekeepers to take part. Even passive participation is welcome, and by that we mean supporting the principles of it and perhaps making use of any queens that the program produces rather than abstaining from imports. So use what the program uses. Work in groups if you can. We're very keen to encourage that. It makes it, groups are difficult from one point of view because beekeepers are good at falling out with each other. We all have different ideas. If you can work in harmoniously as a group, you'll make much more rapid progress. The current stock of bees are our resources. We don't need to bring any more. They've got every gene under the sun practically, so you should be able to find what you want. Active participation involves recording the performance of your colonies and allowing selection of breeder queens, producing a new generation of queens, and the mating of queens initially start in small mating areas, which hopefully you can gradually expand. And that allows you to dominate those little areas with your strain. We know it's supposedly at 6 mile radius you need to do, but that's probably bigger than most of us can manage. And I certainly don't manage in areas because of that, but I still get good results. And then you can distribute your mated queens locally, which all helps to get the strain going, and keep repeating the process year on year. Now, this is a repeat of last week's how you can support or take part in the program. You can join Bibber for £20 a year by direct debit. and you'll be kept fully in touch with what the program's doing, and hopefully you can take a really active part. Or by all means, sign up as a supporter of NatBit for free, and the same thing, you'll be kept fully up to date with the program, and that will be great as well. That's the link. You can find out details. I'll leave that link up there. And this is what we're trying to do: protect and improve the quality of our honeybees. Now, last week there were quite a good few questions. I'll hand over to Roger, and I hope he's still there, to see if he can come in now and put forward the questions that he might have received.
Right. Okay, Joe. Thanks very much indeed. Yes, there's several questions come in. The first one, I'm not sure you can actually answer, but it's been asked, so we will. To date, how many breaches of biosecurity have occurred resulting in an introduction of a pathogen, virus or pest proven to be caused by the import of genetic material, queens or bees from outside the UK? Now, I guess probably Norman Carrick has got...
That's the subject of the talk next week, which is good. That's topical, so I don't have to pretend I'm an expert on that. I'm not a scientist as such. I haven't got scientific proof of anything, and I don't pretend to have. I suspect the Isle of Wight disease was brought in by imported bees. It hit the native bee extremely hard, which implies that the native bee had never seen anything like it. So that's probable. I suspect the Varroa pest was brought in by imported bees, almost certainly. And that, as we're still reeling from that to some extent, as you know. There's suspicions about the latest chronic bee paralysis virus problems. Again, I don't know if we've got scientific proof of that yet, but you make up your own mind, really, whether you think it's a problem or not. But certainly DEFRA viewed it as an issue that should be taken seriously, and I would agree with that. I think we only got to look at other species. We've been pretty lax in this country, and one thinks of ash dieback. We were fully aware that ash dieback was on the continent. We carried on importing saplings from Holland and places, and lo and behold, we soon had ash dieback in this country. It doesn't take too much to put two and two together, but you can say, oh, it hasn't been proved yet. Okay, Roger.
Well, I think the one issue is, of course, the NBU have got all the figures, and they're not really allowed to release them, are they? But anecdotally, there are stories fairly recently of certainly Falbrook coming in with imported bees. You mentioned Varroa, of course. Well, that probably had to have come in with on bees. But on a personal level, when I first started keeping bees in the early 1960s, directly after the hard winter of 1962-63, there were an awful lot of Italian derivatives come in the country, and all the county beekeeping instructors were working overtime because of nosema, because these bees that were coming in were so susceptible to nosema. But in answer to answer the question, we don't really know the figures. So the next question, this is about the physical side of the queens. You say red legs on queens are typical. Was this a specific type of bee? I've always thought that all my queens have red legs, but they're all different.
I don't think it's the look of the queen is not too significant, I don't think, but I have noticed that some of the dark queens have these red legs. And that's just the look of them. That's just the bees around here. I don't know if it's anywhere else or what it is. And I don't attach too much significance to it, because many of the queens we breed are kind of banded, dark banded. They're dark and dark brown bands, black and brown bands, if you like. And again, it's a different appearance, but the offspring all look native. So read what you like into it. I don't think there's too much significance to it.
Right, when assessing bees, for example, honey yields, don't you need to take into account if you're making nukes, etc., from your best, as this will impact on yield?
Absolutely.
So effectively, well, I think we can expand that a bit, Joe, because there are lots of management techniques that come into it, like perhaps moving a colony to denude it of flying bees that come into it that will affect the honey yield.
It's true, there are lots of factors. All my apiaries are static. I don't move my bees around, apart from one apiary to another, but I don't follow crops or anything. So that makes it easier for me. If you're moving your bees around different circumstances, you know, you can't quite do the same comparisons. You have to work it out for yourself. But I try to write down if we take a frame out or a few frames for another colony, or if we have to add some brood or something, or add some stores or feed. I do note down what we've added and what we've taken away, basically. On the whole, I try and let them be self-sufficient, because it gives me the more. I know the Germans with their Smart Bees project were very strict about how you treated the colonies, and they wanted very, very identical treatment for every colony to really get proper results. I'm not that strict myself, but I get the gist of how a colony is doing.
I suspect the question is hinting that perhaps we ought to write in the sort of guidelines that if you do something to the colony, it will affect the honey yield. So you've got to take that into account.
Yeah, that's right. I did it, certainly consider a sort of plus and minus column, which you write down anything you add or anything you take away. I think that would be useful. But yeah, that's right.
Right, next one is nice and easy. Is the Queen record card available on Bibble website?
It's certainly going to be. I'm not sure if it is. We're developing one specifically for this project, which will definitely be available for download pretty soon, I hope. Certainly by the new year at the latest. So you'll be ready for next season. And the more people that use it, the better. But by all means, if you've already got your own system developed, use that. That's no problem at all. We're not saying you have to use this card, but it's there if you want it. That's the good thing.
Next one, does the R and G in the summary record card just mean Queen Mark colour?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. We mark them according to the year and so on. So yeah, we on the record card, I usually put an RG or whatever it is, whatever colour we're on now, and I put a circle if she's marked, and just put what colour she is without a circle if she's not marked and waiting to be marked, should we say? Yeah. But we can all have our own systems. Yeah.
This sounds like somebody with a bit of inside information. Don't think the NBU are it's a statement, I think. Don't think the NBU are a very good support vehicle for queen rearing, as all or most of their bees are imported. In brackets, disgraceful.
Well, I probably shouldn't comment, so I won't.
But, we gave like Joe.
Be diplomatic for once.
So I have also heard that that they are importing them, which seems a bit strange when they're encouraging beekeepers not to. But anyway, that's up to them. Perhaps at the end of the day, we will actually find out the real reason. This one seems as if you might have shot yourself in the foot somewhat. If I can sign up as a supporter for free and be kept fully informed, why should I pay £20 to join Bibber?
Well, yeah, good question. And I've often asked it myself. But yeah, with Bibber, you do get a few extra perks. You get your monthly newsletter, Bibber News. And there's a Bibber Annual, which we printed, a printed version of all the good articles that have appeared during the year. So there are advantages, and we like to think people will join just because they support the cause, really, as well as what they can get out of it. And I think many people do join charities and so on because they support the cause, as well as what they can get out of it. So it works both ways.
This next one I think was probably concerning a few people. Is there a risk of inbreeding when queens mate within strains?
It's quite a good question, and it's a common question. I get asked that quite a lot. And I do stress that we want to maintain genetic diversity within the strain. So all my queens are open mated, which means they're mating with numerous drones from the area. And what the reason I don't think we will, the bee is very well equipped not to inbreed, and is not something I've experienced. And we do look out for it because we look out for it in the brood pattern. It would quickly show up one of the reasons probably for a spotty brood pattern could be inbreeding. So that's why we like to see some good solid blocks of brood. We know there's no inbreeding. But the main thing is that the subspecies existed for thousands of years before we started moving around the world, and they were very genetically diverse. In fact, I'm sure they still are, because probably the bees in Cornwall aren't probably much like the bees in Russia, for example, even though they could be technically the same subspecies. So there is genetic diversity within the subspecies for sure, and I think we maintain it by this system, really. And I'm very aware we should maintain it. I know Andrew Abrams won't mind me saying he's on Colonsay with about 60 colonies of bees, and he manages his bees very, very carefully. He selects them and improves them, but he has maintained that genetic diversity so he doesn't experience inbreeding. And he's managed it on a small island with only 60 colonies of bees. So that's pretty good going.
Do you use drone foundation or comb in the brood box to produce more of the correct type of drones in an area?
I have tried doing that, and with mixed results, shall we say. Sometimes the queen lays it all up with drones, other times they just totally ignore it and so on. I could say I don't do it anymore. I just managed to saturate the area with good colonies and let them rear whatever drones they want. So the strongest colonies, my theory is the strongest colonies, most thriving colonies will produce the most drones. That's my theory. So I've got a good chance of getting the best drones to make with my queens, and I leave it to the bees, really. It's up to you. People do things. They try all sorts of things, but I've found it a bit of a pain in the neck putting drone brood in and then not doing anything. Or, putting a super comb is quite a good way of doing it. And the bottom half will often be laid up with drones, but it's too haphazard for me. I just let them do what they like.
How can we tell that a bee is genetically native just by its colour?
You can't, except unless you have it DNA tested, which I've been fortunate enough to have some of mine tested over the years, because I haven't had to pay for them. Someone else has got funding to do that experiment. And we've had quite a lot tested over the years, and when I've put forward uniform dark looking bees or bees from a uniform looking colony, the results have generally been good. So it is a pretty good indication. And if you put forward bees from, say, a multicolored colony, in other words, quite a lot of black ones, quite a lot of yellow ones amongst them, you'll find they're much less pure native. So the colour is a pretty good indication, I find.
Right, there's two here which I'm going to combine. They're from the same person, or rather, in beekeeping terms, should I say unite. So I'll try and get the gist of both of them. It's basically, early on you mentioned burnout, and there's a comment that somebody mentioned about some heavy lifting, um, and then goes on to say, not complaining about it, this is a very rewarding process, but how do you propose to spread the workload? Well, it's obviously obviously a local
no,
thing, but you've got to work
yeah,
together.
it's a really good question, actually. And it's not easy, because there's always lots of enthusiasm for these groups, but usually someone will take the lead and someone will say, let's do this, let's do that, and everyone else will end up just being bystanders, not doing very much, and gradually get a bit fed up with that. So the group has got to find its own balance, and I think one good way of doing it is to obviously get together as a group, agree your aims, agree your methods, and then break down into small groups of 2s and 3s for your actual work on queen rearing. A group of 2 or 3 could manage a queen rearing hive and do what was necessary. And then because it's such a small group, they've got to take a really active part, and they'll feel really happy if they've managed to get a load of queens out of that process. And all these small groups will be much more hands-on, and it can work. You know, you've just got to work it out for yourselves, really. But I think a system where one person dominates and everyone else just stands around doing what they're told is not very satisfactory, and everyone will quite soon get quite fed up with that. So try and get everybody actively involved, and even if they don't know what they're doing the first time, the second time they do it, they have a bit more idea, and that's how it goes.
Yeah, I think you're right, Joe, but each area is going to be different because perhaps if you've got a carpenter, they could make or repair equipment. If you've got somebody who's good at administration, they could probably do record keeping. So there's lots of things
That's right. We've all got different skills. I quite agree, Roger. That's a good point. And, you know, designate people with a particular skill to do a particular job. That's a good thing to do.
On the subject of inbreeding, do you see any colour variation in your drones?
That's a tricky one. Well, we obviously the drones do vary in colour. They're mostly dark from the dark colonies. Occasionally, there's the odd thin stripe on what we consider a native colony, and we don't know if it's significant or not. They're not usually any yellow on the native ones. There are on some of our other colonies that aren't in the breeding area. You do see some quite yellow drones, but they're all dark, and some are a little bit stripy, and I don't know if there's any significance or not.
What I've noticed, certainly in West Sussex in the last 3 or 4 years, are Cordovan drones. These are where the normally dark areas are a sort of burnt orange colour. And they've obviously come in from outside, and I suspect they're illegal imports, but I don't know because I don't think we can import from the areas where they use Cordovans. So the drones can actually come from outside that particular colony. If you're looking at drone colour, you really need to look at the young drones, don't you?
Yeah, I must admit I don't pay too much attention, but I do pay attention to the new queen's offspring, and we're always very interested in seeing what the offspring's like. And you can tell pretty much straight away if they're breeding true, in other words, if they're coming dark again, or if she's mated with some other strain, and then you're getting quite a few yellow beaks coming in. And so it's a very good indication of how the queen has mated.
This one's an observational one for you, Joe. Do the swarmiest bees produce the most drones?
That's a good question, isn't
it? It is, yeah. I've never come across that one before.
Because they say that, lots of drone brooders indicating that they're going to swarm. I don't know if it does or not, but I think it can do, actually. Before you know it, they're rearing queen cells. It's partly because they're a prosperous colony. Prosperous colonies rear the most drones. It's difficult, isn't it? Especially I don't know the answer really. Again, it's one of these things that needs a scientist to look at it to prove something.
No, it's interesting. If it's it perhaps is something we ought to look at a little bit. The queen is often blamed for bad temperament. Yet isn't this down to the various drones she mates with, as the colony temperament can vary over time? Do you take this into account when selecting the breeder queens?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we often think that when the queen has a bad mating, in other words, she mated out of the strain with another strain, we often think we get a bit of temper issue then, quite often, not always. Nothing's always with bees, is it? But quite often when and then that it shows up in the offspring. So the offspring are looking a bit mixed and the temper of the bees have gone a bit off. So you wouldn't breed from that anyway. But occasionally you do get a native one that's not right and the temper isn't right. We don't know why, but then you wouldn't breed from it because the temper's not right. So it's got to be a combination of factors. It's got to be, yes, they're within the right strain, yes, they're nice and docile, and various other qualities, and then you breed from them. And that's something I didn't mention in my talk actually, but the more qualities you select for, the more difficult it's going to be to achieve anything. I forgot to say that. So if you're just selecting for one quality, like temper, you'll probably make quite rapid progress, but the more you go for, the better. So we try and keep it to a minimum. And we're down to about 4 or 5 things really, and it's plenty. Don't go for hundreds of qualities. It'd just be too difficult to achieve. Okay, when you've got a refined population, you can perhaps bring in some more factors.
I think I'd actually question the thinking anyway, because I'm not sure it's the drones that the queen mates with. I think it's a drone that the queen's mother mated with. But anyway, let's not go down that road today. Majority of my bees are of a dark colour, however, not true black. This said, if I see on an inspection a yellow-born, I wish I squish it. Oh yeah, a yellow queen-born, I suppose. I squish it. Do you try key the strain? I think what the questioner is asking is, if you get a yellowish queen, do you automatically squash it? I think that's what the question is asking.
Well, I don't, because I'm not that sort of person. But I do make sure they're not in the breeding area. I would probably, I give everything a chance, and it helps me, but not in the breeding area. I take them out of the area, and I've got various different things going, and it gives me a chance to compare the performance of my native bees with every other thing that comes along, which is quite good, because I need to know that they're okay. I need to know they're as good as or better than. And that's what we're finding. I mean, occasionally you get a hybrid which performs fantastically well because it's got hybrid vigor. In fact, last year that was my top performing colony was a hybrid. I didn't breed from it because the offspring was all shapes and sizes, and I don't think I would have made any progress from breeding from it. But my second best colony was one I'd bred, so I was very pleased with that, because it shows they're pretty good, and you can get some good results by using the native strain, basically. To get back to the question, yeah, make sure you don't keep it. If you're trying to get, I mean, what is black looking bee? I mean, some of ours aren't exactly black, but they're dark. But make sure you don't keep anything in your breeding area that you don't like, basically. So if you haven't got any other apiaries, you'll have to get rid of them.
Right, this one I know is from a very experienced beekeeper and observant beekeeper. It's really an observation question. Have you experienced yellow queens, in brackets virgins, suddenly appearing and taking over a new colony you thought had a new dark queen in it?
No, I don't think so.
I've actually remember hearing about this or reading about it in one case. And I'm actually wondering if it's come from the same person. So okay,
I can't help on that really. The
no.
funny thing is, while I'm on the subject of colour of queens, I would just mention that we hatch a lot of our queen cells in an incubator, and it's interesting how some of them come out really light coloured, some of them come out dark coloured, some of them come out really light, but in a day or two, they've gone dark. The colour has changed. I don't know what that signifies, but it's quite interesting how they vary. And but anyway, carry on.
Well, they seem to lighten up when they get mated, don't they? I guess it's because of the abdomen sort of stretching, so it's lightening the colour. Okay, you talk of yellow bees. Does it just mean lighter colour? Quite a few of my queens are uniform caramel colour.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yellow, they're not yellow actually. Wasps are yellow. Bees aren't very often yellow, are they? They're more orangey colour. What we're thinking of is the top of the abdomen near the thorax, particularly, is going to be the lightest coloured tergites or segments. Certainly the top half of the abdomen is going to be the lightest area. In a dark bee, they're usually pretty consistently dark. There can occasionally be some spots of lighter colour, but usually they're dark right through the abdomen. In, say, Ligurian or Carniolan or Buckfast, you're going to get at least a segment or two which is much lighter colour. It's not, we call them yellow, but that's completely the wrong description, really. I think orange is closer to the mark, and it can be browny colour, browny.
Getting back to the question about the yellow queen taking over, the questioners got back and said, I meant they seem to have flown in. Now it's looking as if come back perhaps from a mating orientation flight and gone into the wrong colony.
Right, that can happen. Well, that can certainly happen, I think, can't it?
If you've got a queen mating program, queen rearing program, you're going to have a lot of colonies with virgin queens that are going to get mated at the same time. I've had it on occasions where you probably got a week's bad weather. All of a sudden, out comes the sun. Whoosh! Out go all the queens, and I think they all probably get mated on the same day. So that might be what the person has witnessed.
Yeah, I think certainly there is room for confusion with queens of virgin queens. They, as you say, you can get more than one coming out at once. Their orientation isn't always that brilliant. They can go in the wrong hive and so on. I mean, we've got quite a lot of these mini plus nukes in one area. They're not that far apart, and they're in pairs mostly, facing the same way, and then the other next ones will be facing a different way. But there's room. They're different colours as well. So I don't know. On the whole, we seem to get away with it, and they seem to be pretty good. Oh. So I don't have too much trouble with that.
This is really relative to an operation, but how many different breeder queens will you select in a season? You've got 150 colonies, Joe. So how many will you?
Yeah. Well, my ex-apprentice, so she's not apprentice anymore. She does all the queen rearing, but I think she got through quite a few this year. She must have done at least 10, but I would recommend a minimum of 3, really. 3 different strains is what they often talk about in bee breeding programs. So I think you should be thinking about minimum of 3, but it wouldn't matter if you had 1 initially, but on a year-to-year basis, you've got to be careful you don't keep using the same strains. You've got to vary it. But as I say, the bees are pretty good for avoiding inbreeding. It's in their nature. I mean, that's why the queen mates with so many drones, to keep the genes mixed up. And it helps us a lot in some ways, and it makes it more difficult in others.
this one here is probably another lecture for you, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you see in performance, the difference between native and non-native that you keep?
In the performance, well, mine, although I select the most prolific of the strain, they're generally less prolific than perhaps Ligurian and Buckfast bees. Now, someone gave me a couple of colonies, and one of them or two of them were Buckfast, which I kept well away from my bees. But they're quite amazing in that they just produce so much brood. The temper was very good. The brood was terrific, and the honey yield was nothing special. It wasn't a good year down here, but they produced less than my native bees. In fact, I don't think I took any surplus of them because they were just so full of bees. I had to leave a super on just for the bees as well as their brood box. And there's not much in it. They're in danger of starvation quite easily. So the native bees are much more thrifty, and they're capable of good honey yields. And they're easy to manage, I think. Easier to manage because they're not massive colonies, and they're good tempered. So they've got quite a lot of things going for them. I think, to be honest with you, say a Buckfast colony, when conditions are very, very good, will do better than my bees by quite a long way. But certainly where I live, conditions are not very often very, very good. So you have to, have to take your choice.
This is a third attempt at the same question. Getting back to the one with the yellow queen coming back into the hive that the questioner thought had a dark queen. There's an explanation here. There are several Buckfast apiaries around, and I thought she may have flown in from another apiary, perhaps half a mile away, and followed lots of other bees returning to my apiary. Now that tends to suggest almost a navigation issue, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it's looking really as if we probably got an answer to the issue, and it may not be a normal happening.
Yeah, I can't shed much light onto it, but I know Brother Adam went through the qualities of all the different subspecies, and some he reckoned were much better navigators than others, and so on, didn't he? But I don't know how much truth there is in that either. And we don't know. By the way, while on the behaviour of native bees, one thing they don't seem to do is rob. And they, unlike some of the other continental races, which rob very freely other colonies if they get the chance, I don't ever have any trouble with the black bees doing that. So there's quite a few differences, really.
This one isn't really relative to the lecture, but I'll ask it anyway. Have you noticed that I've seen any of my hives chasing drones from the hives? Don't treat for varroa. Have a lot of queen problems. Have the bees decided that chucking drones are a bad policy?
Checking drones out, you mean?
Yeah. Have noticed that I have seen any of my hives chasing drones from the hives. Don't treat for varroa. Have a lot of queen problems. Difficult to know what the queen problems are, unless they're the ones that I've been rattling on about.
Well, varroa is going to affect everything. Varroa does take its toll on everything. So if you've got a lot of varroa, you may have problems with drones, you may have problems with queens. And that's one of the difficulties of trying to give up treatment. But I still hope to do it in 2 or 3 apiaries.
Yeah.
But, your health of the whole colony is going to be worse, and there are going to be more problems.
I think we need a bit more explanation on that one. Let's carry on. Is it detrimental to keep your mating hives near or in a production apiary?
I don't think it'd be detrimental. as it happens, we have separate apiaries from mating apiaries. We have 3 mating apiaries separate, but we're surrounded by, I mean, I've got my honey production apiaries around them. I don't know the rights and wrongs. Some say you shouldn't. Some say you should keep your drone colonies away from the mating colonies and so on. I know nothing about that really. I just know we get pretty good matings here. We don't often get drone layers. We do get some, but
I don't know if it's relevant to the question or not, Joe, but I don't have the sort of mating apiary near the production apiary. They're a few yards away, and the reason for that is that if you're handling a full colony, if you've got queens coming back from their mating flights fairly close by, you are a marker that may or may not have been there when they went out.
it's true.
So that's the
It's a
reason.
good point. Yeah,
I do it.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so it's risky doing any beekeeping in your mating apiary at the peak times, isn't it? You can mess up the whole navigation.
What is the average or best distance between apiaries?
I've no idea really, to be honest. We tend to have our apiaries every mile or two, especially in the, we want a pretty concentrated lot of bees in this area to get the good matings. And so I've got 1, 2. There's some other people with black bees, and they've got about 20 colonies on apiary, and I've got about 30 or 40 colonies around black bees. So it's quite a good concentration. I don't think anyone knows what the recommended distance is, and nobody knows what the ideal stocking density would be for honey production, because obviously it's going to vary from area to area and season to season.
And of course, the kind of bees you got.
Yeah.
Because if some need to collect a lot more for their own maintenance, you can keep a lot less. Right, I'm going to close it.
Yep. I think we should leave some questions for other days.
Yeah, I think so. But I'd really like to ask you this one, Joe. I'm going to really put you on the spot because it's one that I'm sure a lot of people are thinking. Should we push for a ban on bee imports?
It's a good question. It's often raised. My own view, which may not suit everybody, is I don't think we should. I'm very against imports. I think they mess up all our efforts at bee improvements. But all we'll do is put people's backs up. And what we want to do is work with as many beekeepers as possible, not make as many enemies as possible. The more enemies we make, the harder it is going to be to achieve any of our aims. If we can work with as many people as possible, we will, and I think we'll get better progress that way.